Welcome to the world of Sci-Fi Stories, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Enjoy the listening. The human warship so overpowered, the galaxy tried to ban it. The battle was over before it even began. Deep in the void of space on the outer edges of the ZOS system, the fleets of the Galactic Concordance hovered in uneasy silence. Hundreds of warships, each belonging to a different faction, formed a vast blockade around a single vessel. They had come from every corner of the galaxy, battle-hardened armadas of the Vari Dominion, the insectoid hive fleets of the Chua Swarm, the SLE warships of the Noble Zenui Empire. Even the cold machine-like warships of the Augur Collective had arrived, their AI minds calculating endless battle probabilities. All of them had one shared goal: to destroy the warship that should not exist. At the center of it all, floating alone in the vastness of space, was the UNS Behemoth, a ship that defied reason, a ship that terrified the galaxy. Multiple enemy formations detected, Captain, said Lieutenant Vil, her voice steady despite the tension on the bridge. The main viewport showed the endless lines of enemy ships, their weapons primed, ready to fire, were surrounded. Captain Elias Thorne sat in his command chair, one leg crossed over, the other fingers tapping the armrest. He looked completely at ease, almost bored. Of course, we are, he murmured. We knew this was coming. The UN Behemoth was not a warship in the traditional sense. It was a message, a declaration. It was the culmination of Earth's desperate struggle to survive in a galaxy that saw humanity as weak, as insignificant. For centuries, humanity had been ignored, outmatched, dismissed by the greater civilizations of the stars, but Earth had not remained idle. No, they had prepared, and now humanity had unveiled its final warning to the galaxy. The Behemoth was the single most powerful warship ever built. It was larger than a dread, more advanced than any flagship, and possessed technology that defied conventional physics. To the Concordance, its very existence was an act of war. Enemy fleet commanders are hailing us, said Vil, turning toward Thorne. Let them speak. The view screen flickered, and the image of High Warlord Exit Supreme, Commander of the Vari Dominion, appeared, his reptilian features twisted into a sneer. Human, he spat, his forked tongue flickering. You have built an abomination, a weapon that violates every treaty of war. Thorne tilted his head, unimpressed. Oh, and why is that exactly? The Concordance has ruled that no single vessel should have the power to disrupt galactic stability. Exit growled. Your Behemoth is a crime against nature. Thorne chuckled. Funny, I seem to recall that the Concordant didn't care much for stability when you let entire human colonies burn. Exit's expression darkened, and now Thorne continued, you're all scared because for the first time, humanity is no longer at your mercy. He leaned forward, his voice cold. You want me to surrender the Behemoth? You want me to power it down and hand it over? He shook his head. Not going to happen. The warlord bared his fangs. Then you leave us no choice. The Concordance will end this threat before it begins. The transmission cut off. An eerie silence settled over the bridge. Then the enemy fleet moved. Hundreds of warships IGN-ed their engines, their formations shifting, weapons locking onto the lone human vessel. The sheer firepower aimed at the Behemoth was enough to reduce a planet to dust. Captain Fail said, they're preparing to fire. Thorne exhaled slowly, then he stood, stretching his arms. Well, they can try. He turned toward his weapons officer. Activate the overdrive core, he ordered. Let's show them what a real warship can do. The moment the overdrive core activated, the Behemoth came alive. A deep hum vibrated through the ship's structure, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of every crew member. The bridge lights dimmed, replaced by a soft crimson glow as the ship shifted into combat mode. Outside, in the cold void of space, the enemy fleet moved like a tidal wave of destruction. Hundreds of warships, each armed with the deadliest technology the galaxy had ever known, now bore down on a single target. But they had no idea what they were dealing with. Enemy fleet has locked weapons, Lieutenant Vil reported, her fingers dancing over the holographic controls. They're about to fire. Captain Elias Thorne remained calm, his gaze fixed on the viewport. Let them. And then the void exploded with light. The Concordance fleet unleashed their fury. Thousands of plasma cannons, railguns, and antimatter torpedoes were fired simultaneously. Energy beams cut across the blackness of space, converging on the behemoth like a storm of death. Any normal warship would have been vaporized in an instant, but the behemoth was no normal warship. The ship's hull, a composite of human ingenuity and stolen alien technology, shimmered as it absorbed the incoming fire. Kinetic rounds struck, but instead of tearing through the armor, they dissolved into nothing. Plasma bolts fizzled against the ship's energy field, and even the most devastating antimatter torpedoes detonated harmlessly against its shields on the enemy command ships. Panic erupted. What is happening? Ext roared aboard his flagship, watching as the behemoth remained untouched. It's absorbing our fire, one of his officers yelled. Its claws dug into the metal railing. Impossible. Nothing can withstand that level of bombardment, but the humans had done the impossible back on the behemoth. Captain Thorne let a small smirk cross his lips. All systems at full capacity. Vil checked the readings. Shields hold at 98%. Armor integrity is untouched. Thorne rolled his shoulders. Good. Then he turned to the weapons officer. My turn. A single command was given: fire. The behemoth retaliated. Unlike the Concordance fleet, which relied on numbers and overwhelming firepower, the behemoth had no need for excess. It fired only 3 shots. The first was a Hyperion lance, a beam of pure energy so condensed that it pierced straight through the heart of the enemy formation, cutting through ships as if they were paper. The blast left behind a burning wound in space debris and vaporized remnants of ships scattering in all directions. The second shot was an electromagnetic disruptor designed not to destroy but to disable. A pulse of crackling blue energy surged outward, washing over the enemy fleet like tsunami. Every non-human ship within range suffered catastrophic system failures. Engines died, shields collapsed, weapons went offline. Ships drifted helplessly, their crews screaming into dead calms. The third and final shot was the most devastating of all. Graviton implosion. Warheads, each one created a min-black hole upon detonation, crushing nearby ships into oblivion. The vacuum left behind swallowed dozens of vessels, pulling them into the abyss before vanishing in mere seconds. The massive Concordance fleet was no longer an armada, it was wreckage. Silence filled the behemoth's bridge. Vale's voice was quiet. Captain, we just took down over half their fleet. Thorne sighed, almost disappointed. I thought they'd last longer on the enemy side. What remained of the Concordance fleet was in chaos. Commanders screamed orders desperately, trying to retreat. Warships scrambled to escape, but the battlefield was littered with debris and collapsing space-time distortions from the graviton. Warhead's exit, once filled with arrogance, now sat frozen on his bridge, his eyes wide with horror. This, he whispered, this is not war. This is annihilation. The U.S. behemoth didn't chase the fleeing survivors. It didn't need to. The message had been sent. Humanity was done being weak. Humanity had built a monster, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Across the battered battlefield, the remains of the once mighty Concordance fleet floated lifelessly. Wreckage spun aimlessly in the void, fires still raging in the husks of broken warships. What had begun as an overwhelming force to erase the behemoth had ended in a massacre, the kind of defeat that would be spoken of in hushed voices for centuries to come. Yet Captain Elias Thorne felt no triumph. He stood at the center of the behemoth's bridge, hands clasped behind his back, watching the devastation unfold on the main viewport. His crew had fallen silent, staring in awe and unease at what they had just done. For all its power, the behemoth was not a weapon of conquest. It was a warning, and yet the way those enemy ships had been torn apart, it felt less like a warning and more like an execution. Lieutenant Vil finally broke the silence. Survivors are retreating, Captain. They won't be back. Thorne nodded, exhaling slowly. Good. We made our point, but had they really, or had they just made things worse? Captain, another officer called out, urgency in his tone. We're receiving a transmission, priority 1. Encrypted. It's coming from, he hesitated, his throat tightening. It's coming from Earth. Thorne turned sharply, put it through. The view screen shifted, revealing the grim face of Fleet Admiral Helena Carter, Supreme Commander of the Terran Defense Force. Her silvered hair was tied back tightly, and her sharp, piercing gaze held none of the usual warmth. She looked past Thorne, surveying the ruined battlefield behind him. Then she spoke. Captain Thorne, you just shattered The concordance his pride in less than 5 minutes. Her voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it, something ominous. Do you understand what you've done? Thorne didn't flinch. I did what had to be done. Carter's expression remained unreadable. And now the entire galaxy is going to do what they think has to be done. Thorne's jaw tightened. They attacked first. They always would have. She leaned forward slightly. But this was something else. You didn't just win, Captain. You changed the entire power structure of the galaxy in an instant. You made every species out there realize that humans aren't just another race to push around. She took a deep breath, then continued. And now they'll unite like never before to destroy us. Silence. Thorne felt his crew shift uncomfortably. They had all expected this, hadn't they? But hearing it from the highest-ranking officer in the fleet made it real. Vil spoke up hesitantly. Admiral, with all due respect, if they couldn't stop us before, how can they stop us now? Carter's lips pressed into a thin line. They won't fight you head-on anymore. They know they can't, but there are other ways to win wars. Thorne frowned. What are you saying? The Admiral leaned back, her expression grim. The Concordance just called an emergency summit. Every major faction, even those who hate each other, are coming together, and the first thing on their agenda is a formal declaration. Thorne felt his stomach tighten. They're calling for a total ban on humanity's war technology. Every human military ship is now considered a galactic crime, and the behemoth, the moment you show up anywhere, every single fleet in the galaxy is authorized to destroy you on sight. Thorne clenched his fists. They're trying to erase us. Carter nodded yes, and it gets worse. She turned slightly as if looking at another screen. We just intercepted a coded transmission from an unknown source. We don't know who sent it, but it's spreading like wildfire across every major faction. She looked back at Thorne. The message was simple: humanity must be stopped by any means necessary. Thorne's eyes darkened. He had expected retaliation. He had expected political backlash. But this wasn't just about banning the behemoth. This was about the extermination of humanity itself. They're not just banning our ships, Thorne muttered, his voice cold. They're making us the enemy of the entire galaxy. Carter's face was like stone. You have two choices, Captain. One, disengage, disappear, and go into hiding. The behemoth is too powerful to be destroyed. But if you keep using it, we'll be facing an alliance of every species out there. Earth can't win a war against the entire galaxy. Thorne's voice was a whisper. And the other choice? Carter hesitated, aided. Then, with a steely gaze, she said, you start the war first. Before they do. The bridge was silent. No one spoke, no one breathed. Thorne felt the weight of history settling onto his shoulders. He turned back toward the viewport, staring at the scattered remains of what had once been an armada the galaxy had wanted to erase humanity. And now they had given humanity no choice. Thorne closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. When he opened them, his decision was made. He turned toward his crew. We set a course, he said, his voice calm, steady, not to run. His eyes burned with a fire that no alien species could extinguish, but to remind the galaxy why they should have feared us in the first place. The behemoth moved through the void of space like a ghost, silent, and unstoppable. No force in the galaxy could match its raw power. But Captain Elias Thorne knew brute strength wouldn't win this war. The galaxy had already united against them. If humanity wanted to survive, they would have to be smarter than their enemies. Navigation report, Thorne ordered, his voice carrying through the bridge like steel. Lieutenant Vil's fingers danced over the controls. We're en route to Outpost 46 in the TAA Paris sector. No hostile activity detected yet, but long-range sensors are picking up unusual subspace traffic. The Concordance is moving. Thorne folded his arms. Of course, they were after the massacre. It shows the Concordance had lost its taste for direct confrontations. They wouldn't risk another battle against the behemoth. They were too afraid, but fear made enemies desperate, and desperate enemies always found new ways to strike. Admiral Carter warned us about this. Vil said they won't attack us head-on. They'll try to cut us off from supplies, sabotage our networks, turn our own people against us. Thorne nodded. That's why we're heading to Outpost 46. We need information. If we don't get ahead of their plans, we'll be fighting a war. We've already lost. A flicker of hesitation crossed Vale's face. Captain, What if Earth is already compromised? What if the bridge alarms blared before she could finish proximity? Alert! Another officer shouted. Something just dropped out of FTL. Multiple signatures. Thorn turned sharply toward the viewport outside. The darkness of space rippled as ships materialized from hyperspace. But these were not warships. These were prison ships. A cold chill ran through the bridge. The behemoth hurtled through space, its engines burning brighter than ever before. It was no longer just a warship. It was a symbol, a beacon of defiance, a reminder to every human still out there that the fight wasn't over. On the bridge, Captain Elias Thorne stood with his hands resting on the control panel, his mind racing through possibilities that had set a course for Eos Prime, one of humanity's most fortified colonies. If there was any place still willing to resist the Concordance, it would be there. But would it be enough? Status report. Thorne ordered. Vil checked her console. We're 5 hours out from Eos Prime. No hostile activity detected on long-range sensors. She hesitated. But we're picking up a high-frequency distress signal, human in origin. Thor's eyes narrowed. Sourceville pressed a few buttons. It's coming from a nearby debris field. Looks like a battlefield from an old conflict. Signal is weak, but it's repeating. A distress beacon, a remnant of humanity's shattered fleets calling out into the void, hoping anyone was still listening. Thorne clenched his jaw. Can you identify the ship? Vil ran a scan. Negative. But if it's still transmitting, someone might be alive. A murmur spread through the bridge. Everyone knew the risks. It could be a trap, a Concordance lure designed to bait them into an ambush. But it could also be survivors, soldiers, engineers, people who could help them. Thorne made his decision. Bring us in, he said, weapons at the ready. If it's a trap, we'll deal with it. The behemoth changed course, gliding towards the wreckage. As they drew closer, the devastation became clearer. It was an old battlefield, maybe a year or two old. Dozens of human warships ripped apart, their remains scattered like broken bones, and in the middle of it, floating in the ruins, was the source of the distress signal, a single Terran battle cruiser, the Vanguard. Thorne inhaled sharply. He knew that name. The Vanguard had been one of the last ships defending Earth before the embargo. Officially, it had been declared lost with all hands, but here it was barely intact and still calling for help. Life signs? Thorne asked. Vil's hands moved quickly over her console. Faint, but yes, I'm detecting human survivors aboard. Not many. Thor's expression darkened. Get me a boarding team. If there's anyone left alive on that ship, we're bringing them home. Minutes later, Thorne stepped onto the boarding shuttle with a squad of Marines. His pulse was steady, his thoughts focused. He had seen too many battlefields, too much death to let fear cloud his judgment. The shuttle crossed the void and docked against the Vanguard's shattered hull with a hiss. The airlock opened. Darkness greeted them. The interior of the ship was a graveyard. Flickering emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the corridors. Bodies, human bodies, floated in zero gravity, their faces frozen in terror. The ship had been gutted, its systems failing, its crew abandoned. And yet someone had survived. The distress beacon had still been broadcasting. Stay sharp, Thorne murmured, raising his rifle. The Marines followed close behind. They moved through the corridors, in silence, searching, scanning for life. Then movement, a faint sound. Thorne turned a corner and raised his rifle, and then he saw them, a small group of survivors, huddled in the remains of the command deck, malnourished, exhausted but alive. Their uniforms were tattered, their faces pale. One of them, a woman barely able to stand, looked up as Thorne approached. She blinked as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Are you real? She whispered. Thorne knelt beside her. Yeah, he said, we're real. Tears welled in her eyes. We thought no one was coming. Thorne glanced at the others, less than a dozen out of a crew of hundreds. Only these few had survived. He exhaled, his heart heavy. Not anymore, he said softly. You're safe now. But deep down he knew none of them were truly safe. Not yet, not until humanity had taken back what was theirs. The survivors of the Vanguard were in rough shape, malnourished, dehydrated, and barely able to move. They looked more like ghosts than soldiers, but they were alive. That was enough. Captain Thorne stood in the shattered command deck of the ruined battle cruiser, his Marines securing the area. His eyes flicked across the consoles, most of them shattered and useless. The ship was beyond saving, even if they had the resources to repair it. The Vanguard was a dead hulk, but its crew still had a purpose: get them back to the shuttle. Thorn ordered, "We're done here." His Marines began helping the survivors, leading them toward the docking bay. As they moved, the woman who had first spoken, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Lore, lingered behind, staring at a shattered monitor. "Thorn noticed something on your mind." "Commander," she turned toward him, hesitation in her tired eyes. "Before the attack, we intercepted something." Thorn narrowed his gaze. "What kind of something?" Lauren swallowed a transmission. "It was encoded, but we cracked part of it. The Concordance wasn't just planning to isolate Earth. They were planning something bigger." Thorn felt his chest tighten. "Bigger how?" Lauren hesitated. "A weapon. We don't know what kind, but we do know this: if they finish it, humanity won't just lose the war." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We'll cease to exist." A cold silence filled the room. Thorn clenched his fists. "Do you still have the data?" Lauren nodded weakly. "It's in the ship's black box." But she looked around at the ruined bridge. "Power's dead. We couldn't access it." Thorn activated his comm. "Vil, I need a retrieval team here now. We're pulling the Vanguard's black box." Vil's voice crackled through the link. "Understood. Sending a team." Thorn turned back to Lure. "We get that data, and we find out what they're planning." Lauren nodded. "If we still have time." Back on the Behemoth, the survivors were given medical attention. Thorn stood outside the infirmary, his arms crossed, deep in thought. Vale approached, datapad in hand. "We got the black box." Thorn's head snapped toward her, and she exhaled. "The data's damaged, but we pulled enough. The Concordance is building something called Project Dominion." Thorn frowned. "That name doesn't tell me anything." Vilk's face was pale. "It's not just a weapon, Captain. It's worse." She hesitated, then continued. "They're engineering a biological fail-safe, a species-specific virus designed to target humans if they finish it." She swallowed hard. "They won't need to fight us anymore. They'll wipe us out without ever firing another shot." Thorn's blood ran cold. The Concordance wasn't planning a war. They were planning genocide. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. Then slowly Thorn exhaled. "They just made the worst mistake of their lives." Nodded. "What's the call?" Captain Thorn turned towards the viewport, staring out at the endless black of space. "Set a course," he said, his voice like steel. "We find that facility, we burn it to the ground." And then, in a voice colder than death itself, he added, "And we show the galaxy what happens when you try to erase humanity." The Behemoth turned, engines roaring. The hunt had begun. The Behemoth surged through the void, engines burning hot. Time was no longer a luxury. The Concordance's Project Dominion wasn't just another war machine. It was the endgame. If they completed the virus, humanity wouldn't have a war to fight. They'd simply vanish, wiped out by a weapon they'd never even see coming. Captain Elias Thorn stood at the center of the bridge, his expression hard as stone. Around him, his crew moved with purpose, understanding the gravity of their mission. "Vil," he said, "do we have a location on the facility?" Vil tapped at her console. "We cross-referenced the data from the Vanguard's black box with known Concordance research sites. There's only one match: an uncharted moon in the Orion Vale." She pulled up a hollow display, revealing a barren, icy rock with deep underground structures. "It's not on any official star maps. Looks like the Concordance has been keeping this place a secret." Thorn studied the image. Defenses. Vil's face darkened. Heavy orbital weapon platforms, automated turrets, and at least 2 Concordance fleets stationed nearby. "We're looking at a full-scale fortress." A low whistle came from one of the officers. "They really don't want anyone getting near that place." Thorn clenched his jaw. "Then we're breaking in." A murmur spread through the bridge. A direct assault would be suicide, even for the Behemoth. One ship, no matter how powerful, couldn't just bulldoze through an entire star fortress. Vil hesitated. "Sir, even with our firepower, we'd be walking into a meat grinder." Thorn nodded. "Which is why we're not going in alone." Vil blinked. "You have a plan?" Thorn turned, eyes burning with determination. "We need allies. It's time to gather every last human who still has the guts to fight." The Behemoth changed course, heading for Yos Prime. The colony was one of the last human strongholds. Its people, fiercely loyal to the old Terran Defense Force. If there was any place where humanity still had fight left, it was there. But as the Behemoth approached, something was wrong. Picking up multiple energy signatures, Vil said, her fingers flying over the console. "Captain Aos Prime, is under siege. Thorn's gut twisted. Show me. The view screen shifted, revealing the nightmare unfolding below. The Concordance had arrived first. The skies above EOS Prime burned as human resistance fighters clashed with enemy warships. The colony's defense grid was still active, but barely. Ground forces were locked in brutal combat, and from the looks of it, the humans were losing. Thorn exhaled slowly. They knew we'd come here. They wanted to break the last of us. Before we could rise, Vil turned to him, waiting for the order. Thor's expression didn't waver. All hands to battles. Stations. The behemoth descended like a hammer from the heavens. As soon as it entered the battle, the tide shifted. The first enemy warship exploded in a burst of fire as the behemoth fired a single Hyperion lance, cutting through its hull like paper. The second ship tried to retreat, but it was too slow. 3 railgun rounds punched through its engines, sending it spiraling into the colony's atmosphere. The remaining Concordance forces scrambled, but it was too late. Thorn turned to his weapons officer. Deploy the Hellfire drones. Wipe out anything that isn't human. Swarms of autonomous attack drones erupted from the behemoth, streaking through space with terrifying precision. Enemy ships fell apart in seconds, their defenses useless against the relentless assault. On the ground, resistance fighters stared in shock as the sky filled with fire. They had thought the battle was lost. Then they saw it. The behemoth hope returned in an instant. Ragged fighters picked up their weapons, rallying under the sight of the warship that had defied the galaxy. The battle reignited, but this time the humans fought like demons, pushing back the invaders with renewed fury. Within an hour, the tide had completely turned. By the time the dust settled, EOS Prime was still standing, and the Concordance had been driven from its surface. Thorn stood before a gathered crowd of resistance fighter soldiers, pilots, engineers, men and women who had thought they were alone in the fight. He looked at them, his voice steady and cold. The Concordant tried to wipe us out. They took Earth. They stole our future, and now they think they've won. His eyes swept across the room. But they made a mistake. They thought humanity would kneel. Silence. Then he stepped forward. I don't plan to survive this war, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. I plan to win it. The crowd stirred. I'm not here to beg for scraps. I'm not here to hide in the dark while they erase our existence. His gaze hardened. I'm here to burn their empire to the ground. A murmur spread through the crowd. The broken soldiers of humanity, those who had lost everything, felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Rage and purpose. Thorn turned toward the hollow projector displaying the target. The Concorde's hidden facility. They're building a weapon to end us, he said. We take that facility, we take our future back. Silence. Then someone in the back shouted, for Earth. Another voice, for Earth. The room erupted. For the first time in years, humanity wasn't just surviving, they were about to fight back. And the galaxy would never forget what was coming. The war for humanity's survival had begun. The resistance fleet, once a scattered collection of battered warships and desperate soldiers, was now a growing force fueled by rage and determination. The behemoth led the charge, its presence alone enough to rally humans from every corner of the galaxy. Colonies that had once cowered in fear were now rising. Ships that had been abandoned were being repaired. But time was running out. The Concordance's Project Dominion was nearing completion. If they launched their bioweapon, every human world, every last man, woman, and child would be wiped from existence. And so there was only one path left: destroy the facility or die trying. The fleet gathered on the outskirts of the Orion Vale, just beyond sensor range of the Concordance research station. On the bridge of the behemoth, Captain Elias Thorn stood with his officers reviewing the battle plan. Vil pulled up a hollow map of the enemy stronghold. This isn't just a research facility, Captain. It's a fortress, 3 orbital defense stations, a full fleet of Concordance warships, and planetary shields strong enough to withstand orbital bombardment. One of the officers swore under his breath. It's a death trap. Thorn's expression didn't change. And we don't fight them the way they expect. He tapped a control panel, changing the display. The behemoth will engage the enemy fleet head-on. We'll draw their fire, force them to commit all their resources to stopping us. He turned to Lauren, the newly rescued officer from the Vanguard. You and a strike team will infiltrate the facility while they're distracted. Find Project Dominion and destroy it. Lauren nodded, eyes burning with determination. You can count on us. Vil frowned And if this is a trap, what if they're expecting us? Thor's voice was cold. Then we killed them all. A silence settled over the room. Then one by one the officers nodded. No more running, no more hiding. This was the final stand. Battle stations. Thorn ordered we end this tonight. The behemoth burst from hyperspace. Like a vengeful god, the Concordant fleet scrambled, caught off guard warnings, and panic transmissions flooded enemy comms. As their ships moved into defensive formations, Thorn leaned forward in his command chair. Open fire. The behemoth unleashed hell rail. Guns roared. Hyperion lances tore through enemy warships like paper and pulse. Cannons shattered entire formations. In seconds, Concordance vessels returned fire, but it was like throwing stones at a hurricane on the surface of the research station. Alarms blared. Enemy soldiers rushed to defensive positions as Lauren and her strike team landed, moving with lethal precision. Wherein Lauren radioed, moving toward the central lab. Thorn barely heard her. His focus was on the battle unfolding in space. The behemoth was holding its ground, but the enemy was adapting. More warships poured in from hyperspace, surrounding them. We can't hold this position forever, Vil warned. Thorn didn't flinch. We don't have to. We just need to buy Lauren enough time. Deep inside the facility, Lauren's team fought through Concordant soldiers, cutting them down with ruthless efficiency. Then they found it. The bioweapon, a massive containment chamber, stood before them, filled with a swirling, sickly green mist, the virus that would erase humanity. Lauren planted the charges. Packages set 5 minutes until detonation. She turned to leave and came face to face with a Concordance commander. The alien sneered, "You think you can stop what's coming?" Lauren didn't hesitate. She raised her weapon and fired. The commander dropped. She sprinted for the exit. "Captain, we're clear on the behemoth." Thorn exhaled. "Get out of there." The behemoth fought like a cornered beast, tearing through enemy ships even as more surrounded it. But it didn't need to win, it just needed to survive. Lauren's team is airborne, Vil called out. Thorn turned toward the viewport. In the distance, a small craft shot out of the atmosphere, heading straight for them. Right behind it, a massive explosion. The research facility erupted in a fireball, shockwaves ripping through the planet below. The virus, the weapon, the last hope of the Concordance to erase humanity, gone. For the first time, the Concordance fleet hesitated, and Thorn knew what had to happen next. He activated the comms. All ships full assault, no survivors. The human fleet surged forward, striking the Concordance forces. While they were reeling, what had started as a suicide mission turned into a slaughter. One by one, the enemy ships fell until nothing remained. The battle was over. Thorn stood on the bridge, staring at the wreckage of the Concordant fleet. A voice crackled through the comms. "It was Lauren. It's done. Humanity is safe." Thorn exhaled slowly. They had won. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. He turned to Vale. "Send a message to the Concordant. Tell them exactly what happened here." Vil hesitated. "And what should we say?" Thorn's eyes were cold. "Tell them Earth is coming. The galaxy had tried to erase